Hi, this is Matt from Work in Fintech. I'm the founder of Work in Fintech. I'm also CEO of a fintech firm called iPushPull and a co-founder of a firm called New Squawk. And what we're going to do is teach you about all things fintech. So I'm joined today by one of our founding members, Ben Ford, who is a master's student at CAS, and he's going to be interviewing our guest today, who's Andrew Davis, who is a partner at law firm Goodwin Procter. Hi Andrew, good to have you here today. Can we kind of kick off looking at, you're obviously a partner at a law firm. How would that apply to fintech for people looking to get into this area? So there's probably a few things we can explore here. One is around kind of what is fintech, but then you're actually in a very unique position, which I think a lot of people probably wouldn't really appreciate. Maybe even people in the industry don't appreciate. It'd be good if you could just talk through that, because I think our listeners would find that really interesting.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Matt. Ben, thanks very much for having me. So first of all, what do I do? My work is exclusively in the world of tech. And obviously, fintech is certainly in the UK and possibly beyond, the largest single vertical within tech. And so what does that actually mean? So I support companies throughout their life cycle. So we will start working with companies in their early days. We'll help them raise financing. They get larger and grow. We'll help them scale. We'll take them international. And ultimately, we'll help them IPO or exit, or we'll take them wherever they want to go. We act for companies. We act for venture and other investors, supporting tech companies of all shapes and sizes, but in particular fintech, which is the focus of this conversation today. Just to your point, Matt, we do in excess of 200, just to give you a feel, just in my team, just in London, we do in excess of 200 funding rounds a year. So that's a lot of companies we see, and obviously those aren't all fintech, but a lot of them are. And in the US, our platform there will see multiples of that. So we see an awful lot of companies. We see, both from the company side, and investor side, we see a lot of IPOs. We see a lot of acquisition exits as well. So we actually have I think a fairly unique overview the sector throughout the life cycles of these companies, because as I say, we start with these companies in the early days. We like to partner with them in the early days, get to know them really well, and then scale with them as big as they want to go. So hopefully that sort of sets the scene in terms of sort of what I do and sort of my perspective on the sector. You touched as well, I think, on sort of what is fintech, and fintech is incredibly broad, frankly. I mean, it's incredibly broad, and it can mean so many different things. When you first hear fintech, you look at all, the digital banks, etc. But I mean, it's way broader than that. It can touch anything from payments to cybersecurity to everything in between. It doesn't necessarily need to be a regulated business at all. And I think the other thing about fintech is it's important not to see fintech just in isolation. I mean, there are so many companies that intersect with other verticals. So regtech, regulation technology, insurtech, a lot of those companies have a strong technology component. Retail tech, e-commerce has a strong fintech crossover very, very commonly. You mentioned crypto as well. So I mean, it is incredibly broad. I think it's important not to put sort of fintech companies in a single bucket, because it can mean so many different things to so many different companies and so many different people.
It's great to hear with you being partner at one of the leading tech law firms in the world. You're in a unique position where you represent companies, anything, as you said, from startups to companies listed on the market. What kind of trends are you seeing right now following the crazy 2020 that we just had?
It's a fascinating time at the moment for tech in general, but in particular fintech. And I think what we're seeing and what we'll continue to see, I suspect, is a real acceleration in the take up of fintech of all shapes and sizes. For certain parts of fintech, I think last year, some of the large banks were sort of working out what the future was going to look like. But I think through the situation we're at the moment, just fintech has just never been more front and center. And I think that will only continue. And so, what are we seeing in fintech? Well, we're seeing, as across technology, we're seeing a huge amount of money pouring into the space. And we check out just the other day with a huge funding round, and there's a huge amount of capital being poured into fintech, and we're seeing increased investment from the US, for example. So I see lots of growth, lots of opportunity, and when you're in a situation like we're in at the moment, it's going to drive innovation. When you're seeing that mass adoption, when you're seeing some of the challenges that it's throwing up, it's going to drive innovation, and I think you're going to continue to see that, both the growing of existing companies, but also new companies coming in. Particular sort of areas where we're seeing, any specific trends. I think that growth is happening across the space. Some areas like security we've just seen the amount of cybercrime since the pandemic has gone through the roof. I mean, some of the numbers have just been quite extraordinary. Cybersecurity has never been more important. You mentioned crypto already. I think it was sort of a little bit unclear where crypto is going to go, but I think it's going to be a strong area. I think increased use of blockchain, digital banks, I think are going to have a strong time. They're not all going to be winners, clearly, but every bank is a digital bank now. And in that world, the incumbents are frankly always going to struggle against some of the newer entrants. Financial inclusion, you've got 1.7 billion or more people in the world who don't have access to banks. There's a huge sort of opportunity there, especially in this environment for financial inclusion, finding a home for those individuals. So just sort of giving you a few ideas of some of the areas, but hopefully within that, it just sort of shows quite how broad the space is, and quite how broad the opportunities are as I see it.
Something I kind of find interesting is that obviously, as you say, there's a great time for investment. Do you believe that firms will have a segmented market in 5 years' time? There'll be specialists in fintech, in regtech, or do you believe that there might be companies in the future that specialize in the multiple sectors?
I think there'll be a mixture. I think you already have, as you'll know, the sort of investors, VCs in particular, who are, or for example, who are focused just on fintech. And you have a number of other investors who will invest in fintech alongside other verticals. And I see that as a positive dynamic. And I suspect that will continue. I think you will have, and actually we've seen just in the last few days, we've seen one or two new fintech focused VCs appearing, and I think you'll continue to see that. But I think you'll continue to see them play alongside, investors who have a broader investment remit. And of course, the banks, have been very, very important investors in fintech, clearly. And I think that's calmed a little bit since the pandemic, but I'm sure that'll come back. They've been very important investors in fintech.
You obviously spend a lot of time around different fintech verticals and different types of tech companies. Do you have any particular sort of company, any sort of particular fintech company that are catching your eye, or a particular sector that's catching your eye at the moment?
I've mentioned a few sectors, I think a few verticals within fintech that I think are going to be strong. I always hesitate slightly before picking specific sort of winners, but look, I think that there are clearly going to be some losers along the way. But I think I think the opportunity across a fintech, and some of the examples I gave earlier, sort of red tech, cybersecurity, sort of blockchain generally, digital banks, and regulation technology, everything around that, sort of money laundering, helping the banks sort of navigate this new navigate regulations. Perhaps not the sort of the sexiest area, but is critical. Will continue to thrive.
I think something kind of interesting, given the current climate and the current deals we're seeing companies do, is how do you believe crypto might interact with companies in different sectors in the form of method of payments, for example?
Look, I mean, clearly the move that Tesla made a day or two ago was pretty significant. That said, that move is very much, I suspect, driven by one company, and possibly even one individual within that company, and frankly, and was quite an extreme sort of move. I don't know, do not know the answer to that question. I wish I did. I don't see mass adoption in that sense anytime very soon, but there clearly is a home for crypto, and I don't see that going anywhere. The big unknown is how mass will it get. And if I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here having this doing what I do. So look, it'll be an interesting time. That's one of the things that makes the sector so interesting, by the way, is we don't know all the answers. We don't know all the winners. We don't know what trends are going to end up really sort of winning. You just look back, the last sort of 5 years, and just see how the world of fintech has just completely turned on its head. And looking forward another 5 years, the possibilities are endless in terms of where it may take us. So one thing I have learned is predictions are dangerous in fintech. But as I say, that's what makes it. That's one of the things that makes it such an exciting place to be.
Obviously, being situated in the UK, you're going to see many more deals concentrating on UK and Europe companies. Do you see a difference in the way companies in the UK and Europe are valued, specifically in tech, in comparison to the US?
It's a very interesting point. I see a lot of companies in basically UK and Europe raising money, and certainly historically, it's often been said, that in the US, the valuations are higher and more money being pumped into these companies. I think that's probably still true to an extent, but I think what we are seeing is a lot of the US investors, especially West Coast investors, but across the board really, looking outside their home market. A couple of things are driving that. Firstly, there are just some incredible tech companies coming out of the UK and Europe now, and have been for a while. But I think these companies are really sort of hitting a really impressive scale, and also these investors are looking for value. A lot of investors are seeing seeing better value deals, or at least good value deals coming out of the UK and Europe.
Do you see London kind of maintaining its stronghold? Because in, I suppose, FinTech 1.0, when it was some of the open banking and that side of things, London was a leader in that. And then probably kind of China and Asia and that area. And the US was somewhat of a laggard in FinTech. Now they're kind of catching up, and there's kind of talk that they may overtake what we have here in London. Do you kind of feel the same way, or do you think London has a lot of advantages here compared to anywhere else in the world?
I think we have a unique ecosystem here in London, and I think we will continue to produce some of the world's greatest fintech companies for the foreseeable future. I do not see that playing. Is that changing? We have a unique mixture in London of financial institutions and a very entrepreneurial tech ecosystem. We've got an incredible track record of producing fintech companies, great fintech companies, and I really don't see that changing. And I think the point I was making before around the US money coming into UK and Europe, I think is very important, and is starting to narrow that gap into for that sort of that value, the gap of sort of valuations and capital flow differentials between Europe and the US. And I think all of these things, all of these trends are pointing towards fintech companies in the UK and Europe growing at a greater scale than ever before. The capital, the entrepreneurialism, the rapid shift to digitization that we're seeing at the moment, I think it has already seen and is going to continue to fuel huge growth opportunities, okay, Europe and globally.
Something we've touched on is how technology has changed a lot of people's work, from regulation to insurance to finance. But what we haven't talked about is how it's changed your job. How has technology changed the way that you work?
Well, I'm nowhere more so than the last 12 months, frankly. So look, everything we do is one way or other uses technology, and there are a lot of platforms that we use, so helping to get documents signed, and helping to make our internal processes as efficient as possible. That will continue to evolve, and that is a good thing. Anything that can take the simpler jobs, the more straightforward jobs out of the hands of lawyers and digitize them is a good thing, because it's value for money for companies, and frankly, it leaves the interesting work for the lawyers. And I don't see the role of lawyers. There will always be a role for lawyers over and above technology, but I see technology as being a very important partner to law firms, and that will continue to evolve. Clearly the last 12 months has been extraordinary in, putting deals together and building relationships, and negotiating when everyone's, working remotely, has created some really unique challenges, but great deals have continued to be done, and great companies are continuing to be built. I think that one of the big challenges that I think a lot of tech companies are seeing in this environment, especially companies that are in their relatively early days, is building a really good culture and keeping that communication really, really strong. And I think that is undoubtedly some challenges, and certainly, Zoom and other technologies are helpful there. But I think there are definitely some significant challenges that have been thrown up for tech companies by the current environment.
Following that I really want to find out is, given the rapid development you've had in the last 12 months of technology, Do you think it will leave a lasting effect on law as a profession?
Oh, I think it'll leave a lasting effect on every profession, and law absolutely. Look, I don't know what the future holds in terms of any more than anyone else, but I would be fairly confident. The world of working from home is now so normalised, and there are some positive aspects of that. So people have proven, very emphatically that work can be done very effectively remotely, that will continue to persist. Now, I believe very firmly, certainly in my profession, that there will always be a very, very important role of office and bringing people together and building culture and collaborating and all those great things that happen when you are there in person and are just somehow that much more difficult to do when we are remote. Frankly, it's just frankly more enjoyable when you are together and you are together as a team. And that's not just law. That I'm sure that's a lot of other areas as well. So I would always see a future of the officers, in my view, will always have a very important role to play. But I think so will working remotely. I think there will be a balance going forward, which actually will probably in many ways be quite a healthy balance.
You took quite a traditional route into law. What attracted you to corporate transactions in tech? Did you graduate and think this is exactly what I want to do, or is it something you adopted over your career?
I did not. I no, I certainly didn't. I mean, God, I'm afraid the day when I graduated was rather a long time ago now, and the world of tech really didn't exist. I mean, it was not. It just didn't exist as a career path, really. If it did, it was certainly not a mainstream one. And to be honest with you, it took me a while. It took me some time to get into tech. I started out as a very, as you say, very sort of mainstream legal career at a Magic Circle law firm. What I realised, look, I love what I do, but the most enjoyable aspect of my business, of my work, especially as I've got more senior, is the companies and the people that I work with. And for me, tech is as interesting as it gets, and the people who work in tech are generally great and exciting and good to work with. And for me, that as I say, that is the single thing that makes my job most interesting, is working with interesting companies and interesting people doing great things, and frankly, in some cases, changing the world. And that's pretty cool. And I feel very privileged to be working in this area. I've been doing this working tech so pretty much exclusively for the last decade or so. And it's just come on, it's just when you just look back and you just see the scale of the growth and the scale of the companies that are being formed and the scale of investing. It's completely center stage now, and now more than ever before. And I think there's an interesting, fascinating time to come.
Just for our listeners, Andrew, can you explain what the magic circle is? Because I think maybe people who are not in the legal profession wouldn't know.
It's a very, very sorry. I'm sorry for you. I try not to use jargon, so apologies for letting that slip. So there are five sort of UK headquartered law firms who are five of the largest law firms in the world, but certainly the five of the largest or five of the largest ones in the UK and Europe. And they, for whatever reason, are known as the Magic Circle. So I started my career in one of those, and have since moved into tech at a firm that is at the top of the game in tech.
Given that you didn't have aspirations to go into tech as a lawyer, you didn't really know about it, as you said. What advice would you give to students that might want to get into tech as a law professional?
I would say choose your law firm carefully. I know every law firm is trying to do some tech. Not that many law firms. In fact, I would say very few law firms do it really, really well and really get it and really understand what it is to be a lawyer in tech. And it needs to really be in the blood of the firm that you're joining. In Goodwin, for example, we are divided completely in sector lines. We're one tech team in Europe, in the US, and Asia. We are just tech across all the different disciplines that you'd need, and this and the mentality of of approaching the sector, stage agnostic, starting early, building deep roots, growing with these clients, working with investors and acquirers in tech, just really having your arms around that ecosystem. I think it's just so important. But I think not every firm has that. In fact, I'd say there are pretty few firms that do. So I think choosing the right firm is important, and I think also choosing a firm with the right geographic spread is important. The US is critical. for example. So I think making sure that that the firm has the right geographic footprint that sort of matches the work that you'd like to do. But I think just be open-minded as well. Tech and fintech cover so many different areas. There are so many different opportunities and ways to get involved in it as a sector. To just sort of get out there, meet people, and just sort of throw yourself into it.
It's interesting to hear that Goodwin Procter splits itself up into specific sectors. Are you starting to see trend in law graduates in your tech division?
People coming to our firm are interested in tech. It's just such an important part of what we do. And look, tech is just, as I say, tech is kind of mainstream now in a sense that it just wasn't, when I was coming through from university. The world of tech, whatever you're doing, whether it's law or there's so many different ways to get into tech one way or other, but it is really front and center in so many ways. Tech is just so front and center in terms of opportunities that are out there. That's so different to when I was coming through. It's not surprising, that tech is an area of real interest for graduates coming through, and great. I think it's a fascinating area to be. I would just say, know what you want and be open about that. This is what you want to do. Just throw yourself at it, and if the perfect opportunity doesn't present itself out of the blocks, find other ways in. There are so many ways into working in tech, whether it be in law or anything else.
Given that law is such a competitive field to start out in, what are 3 things you love to see on a graduate application, be it their CV, their cover letter, or the first interaction you have with them in an interview?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm not sure I could point at one thing. I really don't, because every applicant is different, and there is not one skill set that I or my colleagues are looking for. I think it's really important to say that we take a very open-minded view. We want people who are going to be, yes, very strong with the law, that's critical, but are also going to be people who our clients are going to want to spend time with. Ultimately, our clients are instructing people. We're not robots, we're people. Clients want to instruct people, and people with good judgment and good legal abilities. And frankly, when you're in the middle of a difficult negotiation, a sense of humour goes a long way. And so I think, look, there's not one thing we're looking for. But when you meet the right person, then it's often quite clear that person is the right person.
So I think just to wrap up, Andrew, if you were to meet your younger 18-year-old self, have you got one piece of wisdom you would give to yourself?
Work in an industry that interests you. That might be tech. It doesn't necessarily need to be tech. It's not going to be for everyone. But work in an industry that interests you, because ultimately, whether you're doing law or anything else, I think working in an industry that interests you, with interesting people in it, that is what's going to change your working life for the better, more than, I think, pretty much anything else.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. So to wrap up, that's Ben Ford interviewing partner and legal tech lawyer Andrew Davis from Goodwin Procter. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for having me.
Thank you.